Welcome back to the Intelligent Founder AI podcast. Today's conversation is for anyone selling into healthcare, finance, or critical infrastructure. When your AI infrastructure stops being a technical choice and becomes a regulatory one. If you are building AI for any regulated sector in the UK or Europe, your infrastructure decision is not primarily an economic decision. It is a compliance decision. And the compliance requirements in this area are not static. They are moving rapidly and in ways that have direct and specific implications for where your models run, who has access to your data, and what your system must be capable of doing without network connectivity. This episode is specifically for founders building AI products that touch healthcare, financial services, critical infrastructure, aerospace, transport, defense, energy, or any sector where personal data is processed at scale. These are not edge cases. They represent the majority of B2B AI opportunities in the UK market. If you are building for any of these verticals, you need to understand what the current regulatory environment requires of your infrastructure, and you need to design your system to meet it from the beginning, not as a retrofit after you have already sold your first enterprise contract. Let me start with the UK picture because it has shifted significantly, and not enough founders building in the UK have caught up with what has happened. The UK AI Safety Institute transitioned to a statutory regulator in 2026. It now has formal authority to set requirements, conduct audits, and impose sanctions on AI systems deployed in regulated contexts. The most operationally significant requirement it has issued concerns critical infrastructure AI. Any AI system used in critical infrastructure, which now explicitly covers healthcare, financial services, and energy, in addition to the traditionally defined critical national infrastructure sectors, must be capable of functioning for 72 hours without an active internet connection. This is sometimes called the offline first mandate, view science. Think about what that means for a cloud-hosted AI architecture. If your product makes API calls to OpenAI or Anthropic, and the internet connection fails or your API provider has an outage, your product stops working. That is not compliant with this requirement for any safety-critical or operationally essential AI function in a regulated sector. The practical response is a hybrid architecture where critical functions can be performed by a locally deployed model for at least 72 hours without cloud connectivity. You can still use cloud AI for non-critical features, for research, for back-office functions. But the core safety-critical or operationally essential functions of your product must have a local inference fallback. Sense. This is not a future requirement. It is the current state of UK AI regulation for the sectors listed. If you are in a procurement process with an NHS trust, a financial institution, an energy company, or a transport operator, expect to be asked about this directly. Now let me take you through the EU picture, which is increasingly relevant for UK founders even after Brexit. Because your customers may be in the EEA, your investors may require EU market access, and the UK regulatory framework will inevitably reference EU standards in some areas. The EU AI Act came into full effect for high-risk AI systems in 2025. It classifies AI systems into 4 risk tiers. Unacceptable risk systems are prohibited. These include social scoring, real-time biometric surveillance in public spaces, and AI that manipulates people in harmful ways. High-risk AI systems are subject to mandatory requirements before deployment. Limited-risk systems have transparency obligations. Minimal-risk systems are largely unregulated. BRATB. High-risk AI applications under the Act include systems used in critical infrastructure management, educational and vocational training, employment and worker management, access to essential services, law enforcement, migration and asylum administration, and administration of justice. If your AI product falls into any of these categories, you face mandatory requirements that include conducting a conformity assessment before deployment, maintaining detailed technical documentation, implementing human oversight mechanisms, ensuring transparency to affected individuals, and building logging and monitoring systems that can provide an audit trail for regulatory review. Each of these requirements has infrastructure implications. BRATB. Under GDPR, which remains the primary data protection framework for both UK and EU operations, Article 35 requires a data protection impact assessment for any AI system that involves high-risk data processing. Large-scale processing, profiling, processing of special category data, and systematic monitoring all trigger this requirement. The DPIA must assess not just what data you process, but where it is processed, who has technical access to it, what third-party systems handle it, and what the consequences are of a data breach or system failure. If your AI model is called through a US-hosted API, you are making a cross-border data transfer on every single API call, and you need a lawful mechanism for that transfer. An adequacy decision, standard contractual clauses, or binding corporate rules. BRATB. Data residency requirements are showing up increasingly in enterprise procurement contracts across all regulated sectors. Healthcare organizations want patient data to stay in the UK. Financial institutions want client data to stay in jurisdictions where they have regulatory clarity. Government departments want data to stay on UK sovereign infrastructure. If your AI product processes data for these customers, a US-based API is not an option. You need UK or EU-based cloud infrastructure or on-premises deployment. This is not a compliance formality. It is a commercial prerequisite for selling to regulated enterprise customers, and it is one that eliminates a large portion of the default AI stack from the options menu. Radar.first aimovers. The UK's broader strategic positioning in this space is worth understanding because it creates both opportunities and constraints. The UK is deliberately diverging from the EU AI Act in several areas, positioning itself as a more permissive innovation environment for AI development, particularly for deep tech startups. The £500 million sovereign AI fund is part of this strategy. The UK's pitch to founders is, we will not add the compliance overhead of the EU Act, and we offer a clear regulatory environment with the UKAISI providing guidance rather than purely enforcement. The constraint is that if your target market includes EU customers, you need to comply with both frameworks, which means designing for the more stringent requirements from the start. For founders in aerospace and transport specifically, the compliance picture has additional specificity that goes beyond the AI regulation frameworks. The Civil Aviation Authority and EASA are actively developing AI certification frameworks for airborne and ground systems, drawing on existing safety case methodologies from Ep.016 and ARP4754A. The current direction of travel in these frameworks requires 4 things from any AI system in a safety-critical role. Explainability, the ability to trace why a specific output was produced. Reproducibility, the ability to regenerate the same output from the same inputs. Operational independence from external infrastructure, meaning the system cannot depend on a third-party API being available. And documented evidence of behavior across the operational envelope. These requirements are fundamentally incompatible with calling a black box API whose internal model weights you do not control. BRATB. If you are building AI for aerospace safety systems, you need to run your own models on your own infrastructure, full stop. The certification pathway requires it. Plan for this from the beginning. The practical architecture for regulated sectors follows a 3-tier model. Cloud AP is for research, development, prototyping, and any non-sensitive, non-safety critical functions where data localization is not required. Dedicated or on-premises infrastructure running open-source models for any function that involves personal data processing, safety-critical decision support, or data that cannot leave the UK or EU. Local edge inference for offline operation, air-gapped environments, and any function that must continue to operate without network connectivity. Build monitoring, logging, and audit trail infrastructure that meets the evidence requirements of your specific compliance framework from day one, not as a retrofit. ViewSense. Sovereign AI is not a buzzword. It is a design principle. The question is not just where your data is stored, it is who controls the model, who can audit its behavior, who can access the weights, and what happens when the network is not available. Every one of those questions has a concrete answer in a well-designed infrastructure architecture. And the time to establish those answers is before your first enterprise customer asks them. You've been listening to the Intelligent Founder AI podcast. If this episode made you rethink where your models run and whose jurisdiction they sit under, share it with one founder who thinks we'll deal with compliance later is a strategy. Subscribe to Intelligent Founder for more deep dives. See you in the next episode.